Hi, everyone. Eric here. Um, we're a few minutes ahead of schedule and going to wait a little bit longer and start the actual stream itself at 7. So in the meantime, I'm going to leave this up and you will see me puttering around doing the little pre-streaming things that one does. I suppose I could have like a splash page or something, but that's not really my thing. I don't know. Do I have a thing yet? I'm not sure that I have a thing yet. But you will see me puttering around at the very least. And having some tea. Tonight's tea is a mix of peppermint and Earl Grey with a bit of honey. It's very nice for voice work. So I hope that folks can hear me okay. I'm going to be adjusting the lights a little bit, and I have moved the camera close enough with a boom that it's this weird kind of angle that I'm just right up in your grill. But hopefully it is close enough that I can deliver a low kind of pitch like this without being too terribly quiet. If anyone is watching and has any notes that they want to give on in terms of how things are sounding, please throw it into the chat, and I will hopefully see that as I'm reading along. I'm switching, as of this week, I'm switching from reading off of a print page to reading off of an ebook, which hopefully will make things a little bit easier. I won't have to work quite so hard to manage light on the page. And I'll be able to position things a little better as far as where I'm looking during the performance. Okay. I said adjusting lights a little bit. Ooh, wow. Got some interesting reflections going. Yeah, okay. Got some recursion. So that is one downside of the screen, apparently. I wonder if I tilt it lower. That will make no difference whatsoever. Okay, so maybe I have a few minutes to try and figure that out. What if I were reading from the other screen? That is worse. Okay, yep, definitely that is worse. Well, this will be excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. This will be an interesting challenge. Logistically, they always kind of are. Okay. we're getting pretty close. I really apologize for the sound that you're probably about to hear. Oh, that's not too bad. Okay. All right. Now that's intriguingly cyber as far as the reflection in the glasses. Also, fun fact, this week I was able to get this one of my old piercings stretched up to a 00 gauge, which I'm very pleased with. And I now have my captive bead ring running through that, which is a thing that I've wanted to do for a long time. So that's very satisfying. Okay, we're a couple of minutes away from starting. And let's see here. What shall we do to kill the next couple of minutes? Still checking those reflections. There's got to be a better way. Maybe if I set the transparency. Appearance. Inactive opacity. That seems interesting. That reduces it a bit. Or, yeah, I'm not going to bother with that. Okay, last minute, and then I will actually start talking, and you won't have to just hear me nattering on. But I do feel like I have an obligation to start on time. And I'll stop playing with my window appearance in a moment here. Yeah, okay, that's good enough. Oh, and my phone wants to take this opportunity to remind me to take my meds, which I already did, and gave to my cat as well. And I'm also going to silence this thing because I don't want to hear it for a while. Okay, so it is 7 o'clock, and today is Sunday, June 7th of 2020. And I am going to be performing a cold reading from Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. So before I get into that, we're going to be starting at chapter 7, which is where we ended last week. But before I get into that, I want to make a thing clear. So this is a project that I decided to do because I thought it would be fun. So if I'm not having fun, it doesn't work. And so far I have been having fun with it. But there's this thing that I discovered, which in hindsight probably should have been obvious reading from an 80-plus-year-old hard-boiled detective novel. There's some stuff in here that's really broken, just busted. And so what I need for you all to understand is that I'm not doing this for a gig. I'm not in the employ of the Chandler estate, and I'm under no obligation to say stuff in this performance that I wouldn't be comfortable saying in real life. Now, one of the challenges of a cold read is that I only know what's about to be said a few seconds before it actually comes out of my mouth. So I've got a split second. If I see something coming up the page that I find offensive, I have a split second to decide, well, is this something that will break the story if I don't say it? In which case, I got a tough decision to make. I might even have to break character for a second and deal with that. But if it's not something that breaks the story if left unsaid, or if creatively edited in progress, if it doesn't break the story, I reserve editorial right to make changes as I see fit on the fly. And not everyone might agree with that approach. There are some people who take more of a purist kind of stance and feel like, the work should be respected. I have written stories, I've written songs. None of them are chiseled into stone. And I don't feel like creative works have a provenance that outweighs my comfort and sensibility. So there's that. Wow, that took longer to say than I thought it would, but kind of had to be said. I will try to find some way to put that little disclaimer into shorter form going forward. I appreciate your patience. When we left off, our detective, Philip Marlowe, had just crashed into a house where gunshots and screams had erupted moments before, and the final sentence of which was, "Neither of the two people in the room paid any attention to the way I came in, although only one of them was dead." That's the end of chapter 6. Let's move on to 7. It was a wide room, the whole width of the house. It had a low, beamed ceiling and brown plaster walls decked out with strips of Chinese embroidery and Chinese and Japanese prints in grained wood frames. There were low bookshelves. There was a thick, pinkish Chinese rug in which a gopher could have spent a week without showing his nose above the nap. There were floor cushions, bits of odd silk tossed around as if whoever lived there had to have a piece he could reach out and thumb. There was a broad, low divan of old rose tapestry. It had a wad of clothes on it, including lilac-colored silk underwear. There was a big carved lamp on a pedestal, 2 other standing lamps with jade green shades and long tassels. There was a black desk with carved gargoyles at the corners, and behind it a yellow satin cushion on a polished black chair with carved arms and back. The room contained an odd assortment of odors, of which the most emphatic at the moment seemed to be the pungent aftermath of cordite and the sickish aroma of ether. On a sort of low dais at one end of the room, there was a high-backed teakwood chair, in which Miss Carmen Sternwood was sitting on a fringed orange shawl. She was sitting very straight, with her hands on the arms of the chair, her knees close together, her body stiffly erect in the pose of an Egyptian goddess, her chin level, her small, bright teeth shining between her parted lips. Her eyes were wide open. The dark slate color of the iris had devoured the pupil. They were mad eyes. She seemed to be unconscious, but she didn't have the pose of unconsciousness. She looked as if, in her mind, she was doing something very important and making a fine job of it. Out of her mouth came a tinny, chuckling noise, which didn't change her expression or even move her lips. She was wearing a pair of long jade earrings. They were nice earrings. Had probably cost a couple of $100. She wasn't wearing anything else. She had a beautiful body, small, lithe, compact, firm, rounded. Her skin in the lamplight had the shimmering luster of a pearl. Her legs didn't quite have the raffish grace of Mrs. Regan's legs, but they were very nice. I looked her over without either embarrassment or ruttishness. As a naked girl, she was not there in that room at all. She was just a dope. To me, she was always just a dope. I stopped looking at her and looked at Giger. He was on his back on the floor, beyond the fringe of the Chinese rug, in front of a thing that looked like a totem pole. It had a profile like an eagle, and its wide, round eye was a camera lens. The lens was aimed at the naked girl in the chair. There was a blackened flash bulb clipped to the side of the totem pole. Giger was wearing Chinese slippers with thick felt soles, and his legs were in black satin pajamas, and the upper part of him wore a Chinese embroidered coat, the front of which was mostly blood. His glass eye shone brightly up at me, and was by far the most lifelike thing about him. At a glance, none of the 3 shots I heard had missed. He was very dead. The flashbulb was the sheet lightning I'd seen. The crazy scream was the doped and naked girl's reaction to it. The 3 shots had been somebody else's idea of how the proceedings might be given a new twist. The idea of the lad who had gone down the back steps and slammed into a car and raced away. I could see merit in his point of view. A couple of fragile gold-veined glasses rested on a red lacquer tray on the end of the black desk, beside a pot-bellied flagon of brown liquid. I took the stopper out and sniffed at it. It smelled of ether and something else, possibly laudanum. I had never tried the mixture, but it seemed to go pretty well with the Giger menage. I listened to the rain hitting the roof and the north windows. Beyond was no other sound. No cars, no siren, just the rain beating. I went over to the divan and peeled off my trench coat and pawed through the girl's clothes. There was a pale green, rough wool dress of the pull-on type with half sleeves. I thought I might be able to handle it. I decided to pass up her underclothes, not from feelings of delicacy, but because I couldn't see myself putting her pants on and snapping her brassiere. I took the dress over to the teak chair on the dais. Miss Sternwood smelled of ether also, at a distance of several feet. The tinny chuckling noise was still coming from her, and a little froth oozed down her chin. I slapped her face. She blinked and stopped chuckling. I slapped her again. "Come on," I said brightly. "Let's be nice. Let's get dressed." She peered at me, her slaty eyes as empty as holes in a mask. "Hell," she said. I slapped her around a little more. She didn't mind the slaps. They didn't bring her out of it. I set to work with the dress. She didn't mind that either. She let me hold her arms up. She spread her fingers out wide as if that was cute. I got her hands through the sleeves, pulled the dress down over her back, and stood her up. She fell into my arms, giggling. I set her back in the chair and got her stockings and shoes on her. "Let's take a little walk," I said. "Let's take a nice little walk." We took a little walk. Part of the time, her earrings banged against my chest, and part of the time we did the splits in unison like adagio dancers. We walked over to Giger's body and back. I had her look at him. She thought he was cute. She giggled and tried to tell me so, but she just bubbled. I walked her over to the divan and spread her out on it. She hiccuped twice, giggled a little, and went to sleep. I stuffed her belongings into my pockets and went over behind the totem pole thing. The camera was there all right, set inside it, but there was no plate holder in the camera. I looked around on the floor, thinking he might have got it out before he was shot. No plate holder. I took hold of his limp, chilling hand and rolled him a little. No plate holder. I didn't like this development. I went into a hall at the back of the room and investigated the house. There was a bathroom on the right and a locked door, a kitchen at the back. The kitchen window had been jimmied. The screen was gone, and the place where the hook had pulled out showed on the sill. The back door was unlocked. I left it unlocked and looked into a bedroom on the left side of the hall. It was neat, fussy, womanish. The bed had a flounced cover. There was perfume on the triple-mirrored dressing table, beside a handkerchief, some loose money, a man's brushes, a key holder. A man's clothes were in the closet, and a man's slippers under the flounced edge of the bed cover. Mr. Giger's room. I took the key holder back to the living room and went through the desk. There was a locked steel box in the deep drawer. I used one of the keys on it. There was nothing in it but a blue leather book with an index and a lot of writing in code, in the same slanting printing that had written to General Sternwood. I put the notebook in my pocket, wiped the steel box where I'd touched it, locked the desk up, pocketed the keys, turned the gas logs off in the fireplace, wrapped myself in my coat, and tried to rouse Miss Sternwood. It couldn't be done. I crammed her vagabond hat on her head and swathed her in her coat and carried her out to her car. I went back and put all the lights out, shut the front door, dug her keys out of her bag, and started the Packard. We went off down the hill without lights. It was less than 10 minutes' drive to Alta Brea Crescent. Carmen spent them snoring and breathing ether in my face. I couldn't keep her head off my shoulder. It was all I could do to keep it out of my lap. End chapter 7. Chapter 8. There was dim light behind narrow leaded panes in the side door of the Sternwood mansion. I stopped the Packard under the porte-cochere and emptied my pockets out on the seat. The girl snored in the corner. Her hat tilted rakishly over her nose, her hands hanging limp in the folds of the raincoat. I got out and rang the bell. Steps came slowly, as if from a long, dreary distance. The door opened, and the straight, silvery butler looked out at me. The light from the hall made a halo of his hair. He said, "Good evening, sir," politely, and looked past me at the Packard. His eyes came back to look at my eyes. "Is Mrs. Regan in?" "No, sir." "The General's asleep, I hope?" "Yes. The evening is his best time for sleeping." "How about Mrs. Regan's maid?" "Matilda? She's here, sir." "Better get her down here. The job needs the woman's touch. Take a look in the car and you'll see why." He took a look in the car. He came back. "I see," he said. "I'll get Matilda." "Matilda will do right by her?" I said. "We all try to do right by her." "I guess you've had practice." He let that one go. "Well, good night," I said. "I'm leaving it in your hands." "Very good, sir. May I call you a cab?" "Positively," I said, "not. As a matter of fact, I'm not here. You're just seeing things." He smiled then. He gave me a duck of his head, and I turned and walked down the driveway and out of the gates. 10 blocks of that, winding down curved, rain-swept streets, under the steady drip of trees, past lighted windows in big houses, in ghostly, enormous grounds, vague clusters of eaves and gables and lighted windows high on the hillside, remote and inaccessible, like witch houses in a forest. I came out at a service station, glaring with wasted light, where a bored attendant in a white cap and a dark blue windbreaker sat hunched on a stool, inside the steamed glass, reading a paper. I started in, and then kept going. I was as wet as I could get already. And on a night like that, you can grow a beard waiting for a taxi. And taxi drivers remember. I made it back to Giger's house in something over half an hour of nimble walking. There was nobody there, no car on the street except my own car in front of the next house. It looked as dismal as a lost dog. I dug my bottle of rye out of it and poured half of what was left down my throat, and got inside to light a cigarette. I smoked half of it, threw it away, got out again and went down to Giger's. I unlocked the door and stepped into the still, warm darkness and stood there, dripping quietly on the floor and listening to the rain. I groped to a lamp and lit it. The first thing I noticed was that a couple of strips of embroidered silk were gone from the wall. I hadn't counted them, but the spaces of brown plaster stood out, naked and obvious. I went a little farther and put another lamp on. I looked at the totem pole. At its foot, beyond the margin of the Chinese rug, on the bare floor, another rug had been spread. It hadn't been there before. Giger's body had. Giger's body was gone. That froze me. I pulled my lips back against my teeth and leered at the glass eye in the totem pole. I went through the house again. Everything was exactly as it had been. Giger wasn't in his flounced bed, or under it, or in his closet. He wasn't in the kitchen or the bathroom. That left the locked door on the right of the hall. One of Giger's keys fitted the lock. The room inside was interesting, but Giger wasn't in it. It was interesting because it was so different from Giger's room. It was a hard, bare, masculine bedroom with a polished wood floor, a couple of small throw rugs in an Indian design, 2 straight chairs, a bureau in dark-grained wood with a man's toilet set and 2 black candles in foot-high brass candlesticks. The bed was narrow and looked hard and had a maroon batik cover. The room felt cold. I locked it up again, wiped the knob off with my handkerchief, and went back to the totem pole. I knelt down and squinted along the nap of the rug to the front door. I thought I could see 2 parallel grooves pointing that way, as though heels had dragged. Whoever had done it had meant business. Dead men are heavier than broken hearts. It wasn't the law. They would have been there still, just about getting warmed up with their pieces of string and chalk and cameras, dusting powders and their nickel cigars. They would have been very much there. It wasn't the killer. He had left too fast. He must have seen the girl. He couldn't be sure she was too batty to see him. He would be on his way to distant places. I couldn't guess the answer, but it was all right with me if somebody wanted Giger missing instead of just murdered. It gave me a chance to find out if I could tell it, leaving It gave me a chance to find out if I could tell it, leaving Carmen Sternwood out. I locked up again, choked my car to life, and rode off home to a shower, dry clothes, and a late dinner. After that, I sat around in the apartment and drank too much hot toddy trying to crack the code in Giger's blue index notebook. All I could be sure of was that it was a list of names and addresses, probably of the customers. There were over 400 of them. That made it a nice racket, not to mention any blackmail angles, and there were probably plenty of those. Any name on the list might be a prospect as the killer. I didn't envy the police their job when it was handed to them. I went to bed full of whiskey and frustration and dreamed about a man in a bloody Chinese coat who chased a naked girl with long jade earrings while I ran after them and tried to take a photograph with an empty camera. End chapter 8. Chapter 9. The next morning was bright, clear, and sunny. I woke up with a motorman's glove in my mouth, drank 2 cups of coffee, and went through the morning papers. I didn't find any reference to Mr. Arthur Gwynne Giger in either of them. I was shaking the wrinkles out of my damp suit when the phone rang. It was Bernie Alls, the DA's chief investigator, who had given me the lead to General Sternwood. "Well, how's the boy?" he began. He sounded like a man who had slept well and didn't owe too much money. "I've got a hangover," I said. "Tisk, tisk." He laughed absently, and then his voice became a shade too casual, a cagey cop voice. "Seen General Sternwood yet?" "Uh-huh." "Done anything for him?" "Too much rain," I answered, as if that was an answer. "They seem to be a family things happen to. A big Buick belonging to one of them is washing about in the surf off Lido Fish Pier." I held the telephone tight enough to crack it. I also held my breath. "Yeah," Ulz said cheerfully. "A nice new Buick sedan, all messed up with sand and seawater. Oh, I almost forgot. There's a guy inside it." I let my breath out so slowly that it hung on my lip. "Regan?" I asked. "Huh? Who?" "Oh, you mean the ex-legger the eldest girl picked up and went and married. I never saw him. What would he be doing down there?" "Quit stalling. What would anybody be doing down there?" "I don't know, pal. I'm dropping down to look-see. Want to go along?" "Yes." "Snap it up," he said. "I'll be in my hutch." Shaved, dressed, and lightly breakfasted, I was at the Hall of Justice in less than an hour. I rode up to the 7th floor and went along to the group of small offices used by the DA's men. Ols's was no larger than the others, but he had it to himself. There was nothing on his desk but a blotter, a cheap pen set, his hat, and one of his feet. He was a medium-sized, blondish man with stiff white eyebrows, calm eyes, and well-kept teeth. He looked like anybody you would pass on the street. I happened to know he had killed 9 men, 3 of them when he was covered, or somebody thought he was. He stood up and pocketed a flat tin of toy cigars called Entractes, jiggled the one in his mouth up and down, and looked at me carefully along his nose with his head thrown back. "It's not Regan." I checked. "Regan's a big guy, tall as you, shade heavier. This is a young kid." I didn't say anything. "What made Regan skip out?" Olds asked. "Are you interested in that?" "I don't think so," I said. "When a guy out of the liquor traffic marries into a rich family, and then waves goodbye to a pretty dame and a couple million legitimate bucks? That's enough to make even me think. I guess you thought that was a secret. Uh-huh. Okay. Keep buttoned, kid. No hard feelings. He came around the desk, tapping his pockets and reaching for his hat. I'm not looking for Regan, I said. He fixed the lock on his door, and we went down to the official parking lot, got into a small blue sedan. We drove out Sunset, using the siren once in a while to beat a signal. It was a crisp morning with just enough snap in the air to make life seem simple and sweet, if you didn't have too much on your mind. I had. It was 30 miles to Lido on the Coast Highway, the first 10 of them through traffic. Oles made the run in 3/4 of an hour. At the end of that time, we skidded to a stop in front of a faded stucco arch, and I took my feet out of the floorboards and we got out. A long pier railed with white 2x4s stretched seaward from the arch. A knot of people leaned out at the far end, and a motorcycle officer stood under the arch, keeping another group of people from going out on the pier. Cars were parked on both sides of the highway, the usual ghouls of both sexes. Oles showed the motorcycle officer his badge. We went out on the pier, into a loud fish smell, which one night's hard rain hadn't even dented. There she is, on the power barge, Oles said, pointing with one of his toy cigars. A low black barge, with a wheelhouse like a tug's, was crouched against the pilings at the end of the pier. Something that glistened in the morning sunlight was on its deck, with hoist chains still around it. A large, black and chromium car. The arm of the hoist had been swung back into position and lowered to deck level. Men stood around the car. We went down slippery steps to the deck. Oles said hello to a deputy in green khaki and a man in plainclothes. The barge crew of 3 men leaned against the front of the wheelhouse and chewed tobacco. One of them was rubbing at his wet hair with a dirty bath towel. That would be the man who had gone down into the water to put the chains on. We looked the car over. The front bumper was bent, one headlight smashed. The other bent up, with the glass still unbroken. The radiator shell had a big dent in it, and the paint and nickel were scratched up all over the car. The upholstery was sodden and black. None of the tires seemed to be damaged. The driver was still draped around the steering post, with his head at an unnatural angle to his shoulders. He was a slim, dark-haired kid, who had been good-looking not so long ago. Now his face was bluish-white, and his eyes were a faint, dull gleam under the lowered lids, and his open mouth had sand in it. On the left side of his forehead, there was a dull bruise that stood out against the whiteness of the skin. Oles backed away, made a noise in his throat, and put a match to his little cigar. What's the story? The uniformed man pointed up at the rubbernecks on the end of the pier. One of them was fingering a place where the white 2x4s had been broken through in a wide space. The splintered wood showed yellow and clean like fresh-cut pine. Went through there. Must have hit pretty hard. Rain stopped early down there around 9 p.m. Broken wood's dry inside. That puts it up after the rain stopped. She fell in plenty of water, not to be banged up worse, not more than half-tide, or she'd have drifted farther. Not more than half-tide going out, or she'd have crowded the piles. Makes it around 10 last night, maybe 9:30, not earlier. She shows under the water when the boys come down to fish this morning, so we get the barge to hoist her out and we find the dead guy. The plainclothesman scuffed at the deck with the toe of his shoe. Oles looked sideways along his eyes at me and twitched his little cigar like a cigarette. Drunk? He asked, of nobody in particular. The man who had been toweling his head went over to the rail and cleared his throat in a loud hawk that made everybody look at him. Got some sand, he said, and spat. Not as much as the boyfriend got, but some. The uniformed man said, could have been drunk, showing off all alone in the rain. Drunks will do anything. Drunk hell, plainclothesman said. The hand throttle's set halfway down and the guy's been sapped on the side of the head. Ask me, I'll call it murder. Oles looked at the man with the towel. What do you think, buddy? The man with the towel looked flattered. He grinned. I say suicide, Mac. None of my business, but you ask me, I say suicide. First off, the guy plowed an awful straight furrow down that pier. You can read his tread marks all the way, nearly. I puts it after the rain, like the sheriff said. And then he hit the pier hard and clean, or he don't go through and land right side up, more likely turned over a couple of times. So he had plenty of speed and hit the rail square, and that's more than half throttle. He could have done that with his hand falling and could have hurt his head falling too. Oles said, You got eyes, buddy. Frisked him? He asked the deputy. The deputy looked at me, then at the crew against the wheelhouse. Okay, save that, Oles said. A small man with glasses and a tired face and a black bag came down the steps from the pier. He picked out a fairly clean spot on the deck and put the bag down. Then he took his hat off and rubbed the back of his neck, stared out to sea as if he didn't know where he was or what he'd come for. Oles said, There's your customer, Doc. Drove off the pier last night around 9 to 10. That's all we know. The small man looked in at the dead man morosely. He fingered the head, peered at the bruise on the temple, moved the head around with both hands, felt the man's ribs. He lifted a lax, dead hand and stared at the fingernails, let it fall and watched it fall. He stepped back and opened his bag, took out a printed pad of DOA forms and began to write over a carbon. Broken neck's the apparent cause of death, he said, writing, which means there won't be much water in him, which means he's due to start getting stiff pretty quick now he's in the air. Better get him out of the car before he does. You won't like doing it after. Oles nodded. How long dead, Doc? I wouldn't know. Oles looked at him sharply and took the little cigar out of his mouth and looked at that sharply. Pleased to know you, Doc. Coroner's man that can't guess within 5 minutes has me beat. The little man grinned sourly and put his pad in his bag and clipped his pencil back on his vest. If he ate dinner last night, I'll tell you, if I know what time he ate it, but not within 5 minutes. How would he get that bruise? Falling? The little man looked at the bruise again. I don't think so. That blow came from something already covered. And it had already bled subcutaneously while he was still alive. Blackjack, huh? Very likely. The little ME's man nodded, picked his bag off deck, and went back up the steps to the pier. An ambulance was backing into position outside the stucco arch. Oles looked at me and said, Let's go. Hardly worth the ride, was it? We went back along the pier and got into Oles's sedan again. He wrestled it around on the highway and drove back towards town along a 3-lane highway washed clean by the rain, past low rolling hills of yellow-white sand terraced with pink moss. Seaward, a few gulls wheeled and swooped over something in the surf, and far out, a white yacht looked as if it was hanging in the sky. Oles cocked his chin at me and said, Know him? Sure. Sternwood chauffeur. Saw him dusting that very car out there yesterday. I don't want to crowd you, Marlowe. Just tell me, did the job have anything to do with him? No. I don't even know his name. Owen Taylor. How do I know? Funny about that. About a year or so back, we had him in the cooler on a Mann Act rap. Seems he runs Sternwood's Hacha daughter, the young one, off to Yuma. The sister ran after them and brought them back and had Owen heaved in the icebox. Then next day, she comes down to the DA and gets him to beg the kid off with the U.S. cuter. He says the kid meant to marry her sister and wanted to, only the sister can't see it. All she wanted was to kick a few high ones off the bar and have herself a party. So we let the kid go. And then darned if they don't have him come back to work. A little later, we get the routine report on his prince from Washington, and he's got a prior back in Indiana. Attempted holdup 6 years ago. Got off with 6 months in the county jail, the very one Dillinger bust out of. We hand that to the Sternwoods, and they keep him on just the same. What do you think of that? They seem to be a screwy family, I said. They know about last night? No, I gotta go up against them now. Leave the old man out of it if you can. Why? He has enough troubles. He's sick. You mean Regan? I scowled. I don't know anything about Regan, I told you. I'm not looking for Regan. Regan hasn't bothered anybody that I know of. Old said, oh, and stared thoughtfully out to sea, and the sedan nearly went off the road. For the rest of the drive back to town, he hardly spoke. He dropped me off in Hollywood near the Chinese Theater and turned back west to Alta Brea Crescent. I ate lunch at a counter and looked at an afternoon paper. Couldn't find anything about Giger in it. After lunch, I walked east on the boulevard to have another look at Giger's store. End chapter 9. Time is 7:38 p.m. and I think we have a little more time. So let's go for chapter 10. My goal with these is not to exceed an hour, but how close I come to that is sort of flexible. Chapter 10. The lean, black-eyed credit jeweler was standing in his entrance in the same position as the afternoon before. He gave me the same knowing look as I turned in. The store looked just the same. The same lamp glowed on the small desk in the corner, and the same ash blonde in the same black suede-like dress got up from behind it and came towards me with the same tentative smile on her face. "What's it?" she said, and stopped. Her silver nails twitched at her side. There was an overtone of strain in her smile. It wasn't a smile at all, it was a grimace. She just thought it was a smile. "Back again," I chirped airily, waved a cigarette. "Mr. Giger in today?" I'm afraid not. No, I'm afraid not. Let me see. You wanted..." I took my dark glasses off and tapped them delicately on the inside of my left wrist. If you can weigh 190 pounds and look like a fairy, I was doing my best. Charming. "That was just a stall about those first editions," I whispered. "I have to be careful. I've got something he'll want. Something he's wanted for a long time." The silver fingernails touched the blonde hair over one small, jet-buttoned ear. "Oh, a salesman," she said. "Well, you might come in tomorrow. I think he'll be here tomorrow." "Drop the veil," I said. "I'm in the business too." Her eyes narrowed until they were a faint, greenish glitter, like a forest pool far back in the shadow of trees. Her fingers clawed at her palm. She stared at me and chopped off a breath. "Is he sick?" "I could go up to the house," I said impatiently. "I haven't got forever." You... Her throat jammed. I thought she was going to fall on her nose. Her whole body shivered, and her face fell apart like a bride's pie crust. She put it together again slowly, as if lifting a great weight by sheer willpower. The smile came back with a couple of corners badly bent. "No," she breathed. "No, he's out of town. That wouldn't be any use. Can't you come in tomorrow?" I had my mouth open to say something when the partition door opened a foot. The tall, dark, handsome boy in the jerkin looked out, pale-faced and tight-lipped. Saw me, shut the door quickly again, but not before I had seen on the floor behind him a lot of wooden boxes lined with newspapers and packed loosely with books. A man in very new overalls was fussing with them. Some of Giger's stock was being moved out. When the door shut, I put my dark glasses on again and touched my hat. Tomorrow, then. I'd like to give you a card, but you know how it is. Yes, I know how it is. She shivered a little more and made a faint sucking noise between her bright lips. I went out of the store and west on the boulevard to the corner, north on the street to the alley which ran behind the stores. A small black truck with wire sides and no lettering on it was backed up to Giger's place. The man in the very new overalls was just heaving a box up onto the tailboard. I went back to the boulevard and along the block next to Giger's, found a taxi standing at a fire plug. A fresh-faced kid was reading a horror magazine behind the wheel. I leaned in and showed him $1. Tail job? He looked me over. Cop? Private. He grinned. My meat, Jack. He tucked the magazine over his rearview mirror and I got into the cab. We went around the block and pulled up across from Giger's alley, beside another fire plug. There were about a dozen boxes on the truck when the man in overalls closed the screened doors and hooked the tailboard up and got in behind the wheel. Take him, I told my driver. The man in overalls gunned his motor, shot a glance up and down the alley, and ran away fast in the other direction. He turned left out of the alley. We did the same. I caught a glimpse of the truck turning east on Franklin, told my driver to close in a little. He didn't or couldn't do it. I saw the truck 2 blocks away when we got to Franklin. We had it in sight to Vine and across Vine and all the way to Western. We saw it twice after Western. There was a lot of traffic, and the fresh-faced kid tailed from too far back. I was telling him about that without mincing words when the truck, now far ahead, turned north again. The street at which it turned was called Brittany Place. When we got to Brittany Place, the truck had vanished. The fresh-faced kid made comforting sounds at me through the panel, and we went up the hill at 4 miles an hour looking for the truck behind bushes. 2 blocks up, Brittany Place swung to the east and met Randall Place in a tongue of land on which there was a white apartment house with its front on Randall Place and its basement garage opening on Brittany. We were going past that. The fresh-faced kid was telling me the truck couldn't be far away when I looked through the arched entrance of the garage and saw it back in the dimness with its rear doors open again. We went around to the front of the apartment house, and I got out. There was nobody in the lobby, no switchboard. A wooden desk was pushed back against the wall beside a panel of gilt mailboxes. I looked the names over. A man named Joseph Brody had apartment 405. A man named Joe Brody had received $5,000 from General Sternwood to stop playing with Carmen and find some other little girl to play with. It could be the same Joe Brody. I felt like giving odds on it. I went around an elbow of wall to the foot of tiled stairs and the shaft of the automatic elevator. The top of the elevator was level with the floor. There was a door beside the shaft lettered Garage. I opened it and went down narrow steps to the basement. The automatic elevator was propped open, and the man in new overalls was grunting hard as he stacked heavy boxes in it. I stood beside him and lit a cigarette and watched him. He didn't like my watching him. After a while, I said, "Watch the weight, bud. She's only tested for half a ton. Where's the stuff going?" "Brody, 405, he grunted. "Manager?" "Yeah. Looks like a nice lot of loot." He glared at me with pale, white-rimmed eyes. "Books," he snarled. 100 pounds a box, easy. Me with a 75-pound back. "Well, watch the weight," I said. He got into the elevator with 6 boxes, shut the doors. I went back up the steps to the lobby and out to the street. The cab took me downtown again to my office building. I gave the fresh-faced kid too much money, and he gave me a dog-eared business card, which for once I didn't drop into the Majolka jar of sand beside the elevator bank. I had a room and a half on the 7th floor at the back. The half room was an office split in two to make reception rooms. Mine had my name on it and nothing else, and that only on the reception room. I always left this unlocked in case I had a client, and the client cared to sit down and wait. I had a client. End chapter 10. What the hell? Chapter 11. She wore brownish speckled tweeds, a mannish shirt and tie, hand-carved walking shoes. Her stockings were just as sheer as the day before, but she wasn't showing as much of her legs. Her black hair was glossy under a brown Robin Hood hat that might have cost $50 and looked as if you could have made it with one hand out of a desk blotter. "Well, you do get up," she said, wrinkling her nose at the faded red settee, the two odd semi-easy chairs, the net curtains that needed laundering, and the boys'-sized library table with the venerable magazines on it to give the place a professional touch. "I was beginning to think perhaps you worked in bed like Marcel Proust." "Who's he?" I put a cigarette in my mouth and stared at her. She looked a little pale and strained, but she looked like a girl who could function under a strain. "A French writer, a connoisseur in degenerates. You wouldn't know him." "Tut, tut," I said. "Come into my boudoir." She stood up and said, "We didn't get along very well yesterday. Perhaps I was rude." "We were both rude," I said. I unlocked the communicating door and held it for her. We went into the rest of my suite, which contained a rust-red carpet, not very young, 5 green filing cases, 3 of them full of California climate, an advertising calendar showing the Quints rolling around on a sky-blue floor in pink dresses with seal brown hair and sharp black eyes as large as mammoth prunes. There were 3 near-walnut chairs, the usual desk with the usual blotter, pen set, ashtray, telephone, and the usual squeaky swivel chair behind it. "You don't put on much of a front," she said, sitting down at the customer side of the desk. I went over to the mail slot and picked up 6 envelopes, 2 letters and 4 pieces of advertising matter. I hung my hat on the telephone and sat down. "Neither do the Pinkertons," I said. "You can't make much money at this trade if you're honest. If you have a front, you're making money, or expect to." "Oh, are you honest?" she asked, and opened her bag. She picked a cigarette out of a French enamel case, lit it with a pocket lighter, dropped case and lighter back into the bag, and left the bag open. Painfully. "How did you get into this slimy kind of business, then?" "How did you come to marry a bootlegger?" "Oh my God, let's not start quarreling again. I've been trying to get you on the phone all morning, here and at your apartment." "About Owen." Her face tightened sharply. Her voice was soft. "Poor Owen," she said. "So you know about that." "A DA's man took me down to Lido. He thought I might know something about it, but he knew much more than I did. He knew Owen wanted to marry your sister, once." She puffed silently at her cigarette and considered me with steady black eyes. "Perhaps it wouldn't have been a bad idea," she said quietly. "He was in love with her. We don't find much of that in our circle. He had a police record." She shrugged. She said negligently, "He didn't know the right people. That's all a police record means in this rotten, crime-ridden country." "I wouldn't go that far." She peeled her right glove off, bit her index finger at the first joint, looking at me with steady eyes. "I didn't come to see you about Owen. Do you feel yet that you can tell me what my father wanted to see you about? Not without his permission. Was it about Carmen? I can't even say that. I finished filling a pipe and put a match to it. She watched the smoke for a moment. Then her hand went into her open bag and came out with a thick white envelope. She tossed it across the desk. You'd better look at it anyway, she said. I picked it up. The address was typewritten. To Mrs. Vivian Regan, 3765 Alta Crescent, West Hollywood. Delivery had been by messenger service, and the office stamp showed 8:35 a.m. as the time out. I opened the envelope and drew out the shiny 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 photo. That was all there was inside. It was Carmen, sitting in Giger's high-backed teak wood chair on the dais, in her earrings and her birthday suit. Her eyes looked even a little crazier than as I remembered them. The back of the photo was blank. I put it back in the envelope. How much do they want? I asked. 5,000 for the negative and the rest of the prints. The deal has to be closed tonight or they give the stuff to some scandal sheet. The demand came how? A woman telephoned me about half an hour after this thing was delivered. There's nothing in the scandal sheet angle. Juries convict without leaving the box on that stuff nowadays. What else is there? Does there have to be something else? Yes. She stared at me, a little puzzled. There is. The woman said there was a police gem connected with it and I'd better lay it on the line fast or I'd be talking to my little sister through a wire screen. Better, I said. What kind of jam? I don't know. Where's Carmen now? She's at home. She was sick last night. She's still in bed, I think. Did she go out last night? No. I was out, but the servants say she wasn't. I was down at Los Alindas, playing roulette at Eddie Mars's Cypress Club. Lost my shirt. So you like roulette? You would. She crossed her legs and lit another cigarette. Yes, I like roulette. All Sternwoods like losing games, like roulette, and marrying men that walk out on them, and riding steeplechases at 58 years old and being rolled on by a jumper and crippled for life. The Sternwoods have money. All it's brought them is a rain check. What was Owen doing last night with your car? Nobody knows. He took it without permission. We always let him take a car on his night off, but last night wasn't his night off. She made a wry mouth. Do you think you know about this nude photo? How would I be able to say? I don't rule him out. Can you get 5,000 in cash right away? Not unless I tell Dad, or borrow it. Could probably borrow it from Eddie Mars. He ought to be generous with me, heaven knows. Better try that. You may need it in a hurry. She leaned back and hung an arm over the back of the chair. How about telling the police? It's a good idea, but you won't do it. Won't I? No. You have to protect your father and your sister. You don't know what the police might turn up. Might be something they couldn't sit on. Though they usually try in blackmail cases. Can you do anything? I think I can, but I can't tell you why or how. I like you, she said suddenly. You believe in miracles. Would you have a drink in the office? I unlocked my deep drawer and got out my office bottle and 2 pony glasses. I filled them and we drank. She snapped her bag shut, pushed the chair back. I'll get the $5,000. I've been a good customer of Eddie Mars. There's another reason why he should be nice to me, which you may not know. She gave me one of those smiles the lips have forgotten before they reach the eyes. Eddie's blonde wife is the lady Rusty ran away with. I didn't say anything. She stared tightly at me and added, That doesn't interest you. I ought to make it easier to find him if I was looking for him. You don't think he's in this mess, do you? She pushed her empty glass at me. Give me another drink. You're the hardest guy to get anything out of. You don't even move your ears. I filled the little glass. You got all you wanted out of me. Pretty good idea that I'm not looking for your husband. She put the drink down very quickly. It made her gasp, or gave her an opportunity to gasp. She let a breath out slowly. Rusty was no crook. If he had been, it wouldn't have been for nickels. He carried $15,000 in bills. He called it his mad money. He had it when I married him, and he had it when he left me. No, Rusty's not in on any cheap blackmail racket. She reached for the envelope and stood up. I'll keep in touch with you. Excuse me. Sorry. She reached for the envelope and stood up. I'll keep in touch with you, I said. If you want to leave me a message, the phone girl at my apartment house will take care of it. We walked over to the door. Tapping the white envelope against her knuckles, she said, You still feel you can't tell me what Dad... I'd have to see him first. She took the photo out and stood looking at it just inside the door. She has a beautiful little body, hasn't she? Uh-huh. She leaned a little towards me. You want to see mine, she said gravely. Can it be arranged? She laughed suddenly and sharply and went halfway through the door, then turned her head to say coolly, You're as cold-blooded a beast as I ever met, Marlowe. Can I call you Phil? Sure. You can call me Vivian. Thanks, Mrs. Regan. I'll go to hell, Marlowe. She went on out and didn't look back. I let the door shut and stood with my hand on it, staring at the hand. My face felt a little hot. I went back to the desk, put the whiskey away, rinsed out the 2 pony glasses and put them away. I took my hat off the phone and called the DA's office and asked for Bernie Oles. He was back in his cubbyhole. Well, I let the old man alone, he said. The butler said he or one of the girls would tell him. This Owen Taylor lived over the garage, and as I went through his stuff. Parents in Dubuque, Iowa. I wired the chief of police there to find out what they want done. Sternwood family will pay for it. Suicide, I asked. No can tell. He didn't leave any notes. He had no leave to take the car. Everybody was home last night but Mrs. Regan. She was down at Las Olindas with a playboy named Larry Cobb. I checked on that. I know a lad on one of the tables. You want to stop some of that flash gambling, I said. The syndicate we got in this county? Be your age, Marlowe. That sap mark on the boy's head bothers me. Sure you can't help me on this? I liked his putting it that way. It let me say no without actually lying. We said goodbye, and I left the office. Bought all 3 afternoon papers and rode a taxi down to the Hall of Justice to get my car out of the lot. There was nothing in any of the papers about Giger. I took another look at his blue notebook, but the code was just as stubborn as it had been the night before. That is the end of chapter 11, and it is 8 o'clock on the nose, so we are at 1 hour, and I'm going to call it for tonight. I'll be doing this again 7 p.m. next Sunday, and I thank you all for coming along for the ride. Everybody take care. Be safe.